Thank you, and good to see so many and people listening in, so many colleagues listening in. Good afternoon, morning, evening, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. It is a bit of a last minute that we were asked to come in and participate in this session. We are hoping to participate in the second part or the second session within this EPE. As Elisabetta was saying, and I hope you can all hear me. Do let me know if you can't hear me. As Elisabetta was saying, there have been many of these sessions and many of these opportunities for sharing our experiences on the adaptation, and so hopefully we can try to cover something new, and hopefully some of the points that I will cover based on the ILO experience will be new. Next slides, please. As many of us involved in this, we are sort of doing this on two fronts, also reflecting the two sessions. That one thing is the adaptation, and the other thing is the actual evaluation of our response. And this is a timeline that sort of captures, in a sense, both of those path in the way that ILO has done it. And we started early with the guidance note in March 2020 on the implications of COVID on evaluations, focusing very much on how can we ensure that evaluation with the changing circumstances and the drastic changing situation could be adapted. Those guidance based on that, we then created a knowledge platform for sharing the experiences with our various evaluation network, evaluation managers, and regional evaluation officers and other colleagues, which we then also used as part of our input to the OECD COVID-19 Evaluation Coalition that many of us are involved in, and also the work of this working group. And some of you might recall that there are actually products done by the working group on a mapping or compilation of the guidance that were put out up till September 2020, and also an attempt to map a little bit the gap in terms of where further guidance might be needed. The OECD, COVID-19 Evaluation Coalition also put out some joint guidance where many of us, contributed to. We then had, throughout the process when we were adapting or trying to carry out evaluations, we had a number of sort of events or opportunities to discuss that, including our regular evaluation workshop with our network. And that experience, and I will mention a little bit about how we try to document that experience and what actually came out of it. And we've used that experience to adapt evaluations at all levels, including those evaluations that are specifically looking at the COVID-19 response, such as our upcoming high-level evaluation that you also see illustrated there. And the intention is obviously over the next 6 months or so to review the adaptation, use it for updated guidance with a focus on what is it that we have learned that can be carried forward, both for situations, similar to situations of pandemic, crisis, external shocks, but obviously, very importantly, also in our more normal work, once that gets into some level of some degree of normality, although things are definitely going to be different. Next slides, please. There are a number of slides here, and I will only go through some quick points on it, but it was basically the presentation that we had on this, and I have not actually as such adjusted it specifically to this occasion. So the initial guidance was very much about we have to maintain the evaluation to the extent possible during this, this situation without taking the unnecessary strips. We had some general principles, one of them being evaluation is core business. It is part of results-based management. It is as important as ever during this situation, during the pandemic. But yes, it of course needs to be adjusted. And these things have to be done in real time. One of the things that we found very, very important was to try and link it to other COVID-19 guidance that was issued by the organization regarding implementation of development cooperation projects and so on, so that evaluation, again, we reinforce it's integral part of it. We recognize the situation, we recognize the needs for adaptation, but it is part of the regular activities. We then had this process for focused learning, where we try to capture the learning from the actual implementation of evaluation through a knowledge platform. Not always as successful as we had hoped, partly reflecting that people were, of course, very much busy trying to adapt. The importance of having some pointers, some key learnings, and really relate them to specific types of evaluation, whether country level evaluations, systematic evaluations, specific types of project evaluations. Next slide, please. Many of the guidance that was used have sort of taken the risk assessment approach, and we also did this, and this is sort of showing the kind of matrix that we provided, where very importantly, we looked at the constraints and limitations, we identified if it was mission critical, and then we used this sort of metrics to see what do we do next. And then we also had a set of strategic considerations that also identified scenarios for different types of evaluations and what you might be doing in different types of evaluation. We very importantly also were putting forward the idea of trying to cluster evaluations, trying to be a little bit efficient in our evaluation. It relates to the fact that we had an ongoing process of trying to introduce clustered evaluations. And a very important part of it was that in the assessment of the adaptation and how you could adapt and whether it was possible to adapt was that we could ensure the minimum quality standards for evaluation. If we don't meet those, then perhaps we should not do the evaluation. So next slides. These are some of the points that we that came up in terms of our actual sharing experiences. And some of the key ones was the need for a phased hybrid approach, in terms of, do your initial steps and then see if you can, continue and in what way you can continue. Very important to a very simple thing, but have the terms of reference, have the built-in flexibility, make reference to the COVID-19 situation. Many of these points that you see here are obviously ones that you will all recognize and that you have all seen. One point, for instance, is the summative versus formative, and that's a little bit, we did some cases where we're continuing evaluations. We obviously want to look at the achievement of the project prior to the COVID-19, because in many cases, that's where the bulk of the work of the project was done. But often we were faced with so much of a focus on the COVID-19 situation, both in terms of the adaptation, but in terms of what it meant for the project and the context and so on, that sometimes it was difficult to sort of really say, yes, but do you remember before COVID-19? Do you remember those results that we were trying to achieve? So there was an element of changing the goalpost for the evaluation, and of course it was important to look at that adaptation, look at in that sense the response to the COVID-19, but in terms of the methodology and so on, in terms of the approach, dealing with this aspect that we needed people to focus on the pre-COVID situation as well, because that was part of the project. Joint efforts to collect information using existing information from other evaluations is also a point, and the need for strengthened evaluability, because during these situations, monitoring data might not be available and was jeopardized. Next slide. And here, I have to also give credit to, and Elisabetta mentioned at the beginning the blog by Jos Vassen of the World Bank, who has also been involved in UNEG work, and he actually used these kind of way of looking at it with, that the areas of challenges that we are facing. There are a number of challenges on the ethical side in terms of, are these priority? Can we implement it during the risk situation and so on? Then there are a number of conceptual ones. What kind of change in interventions are we looking at? The repurposing, the changes in the context that we have to consider, the nature of the impact that we are now looking at, where now there could be a focus on immediate response to health and other related issues, even in projects that did not necessarily have that focus, versus the indirect or the longer term ones in terms of employment. And one very important one is the change in the nature of the evaluation information demanded. Will our clients, will our stakeholders ask for different types of information, or did they ask for different types of information during COVID-19, not only on COVID-19, but also in terms of other parts of the project? And then there's the methodological ones, and I'm not going to go into those because those I think we've all come across. These are sort of different faces, different spheres of challenges, but they are of course interlinked and affect each other. But looking at them a little bit in this way is perhaps as useful. And the way that, and that last point is one that I've sort of added about the renewed call for evaluability assessment, because many of these things, these issues, these challenges are to be considered in an evaluability assessment. And I really feel that we need to make sure that we do the proper evaluability assessment, and some of these issues, some of the things that we've learned from adaptation and that we are carrying forward becomes part of our availability assessment. And then we do this more on an ongoing basis in real time. The OECD joint guidance on good sort of on COVID-19 evaluation under COVID-19 actually refers to a paper that was done on ILO's experience with evaluability assessment. The final slide, I'm in the spirit of going forward, and I put a few things in there that I think are worth considering, where we might also have adaptation and that we need to consider. Is this leading to more collaborative joint work? We've seen the coalition, more synthesis, meta-analysis, more basing it on other evaluations, existing evaluations, country-level evaluations feeding into thematic and global evaluations. Are there commitment? And I think that's a very important point in as we go forward. Are we learning about not using more national consultants, for instance? Do we have the commitment, the agreement from our clients, our stakeholders, to using these niche approaches? Do they feel they give the same level of credibility? Also, again, the issues of what the clients, the commissioners not want to know, what type of evaluative information, more on the adaptive. And I just want to make that last point, and I'm sorry if I've taken a little bit more time, but the demand for these new approaches, such as real-time evaluation and so on, to what extent are they just as much replying to recurrent issues with evaluation rather than sort of being really new learning in that sense, because of the ongoing process of questioning, are we addressing the right questions? Are we using the right methodologies? So it was a quick overview. I've taken a little bit more time than I should. I apologize for that, but I hope it has been useful also in setting the scene. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. It was very useful. Thank you, and thank you again for really helping out with the later notice. It's now time for a quick interview to Anne-Claire Luzo from WFP. Thank you, Anne-Claire, for being here. There are two questions. The first one is what is WFP experience in adapting evaluations, and really throughout your portfolio of evaluations, from impact, country strategic plan, global, etc. You'll choose which one to follow, but what is your experience? Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks a lot, Elisabetta, for your question. And no problem, Peter. Some of the things I was about to say, you have mentioned them. So it's a win-win situation here. In WFP, at the onset of the crisis, what we did is to have a look a little bit like the matrix you presented, Peter, but we looked at it in terms of scenarios. We could either postpone an evaluation, we could cancel it, we could just go ahead and there was no need for change. We could also go from an evaluation to a desk study, or we could undertake a remote evaluation. What has happened, in fact, is that very few evaluations were actually postponed because of the crisis. They were postponed sometimes for other reasons. We did not need to go from an evaluation exercise to a desk study as we thought we might have to do. But we have also not hesitated to cancel a couple of evaluations where we found that the totally remote approach was not going to work and it was impossible to have an hybrid approach. So we have canceled a couple of evaluations, and basically for the country level evaluation, what we call the country strategic plan evaluations, we have undertaken an hybrid model in all instances. And for some of the global evaluations, we have gone into a totally remote approach. I would say that it is important to dare to cancel an exercise if we find, for some of the reasons that Peter had presented in his own presentation, it is not critical. I mean, there are a certain number of factors that we used to actually make those decisions. Another point is that we negotiated with the evaluation teams on defining upfront at the start of the evaluation the commitment they had to have in-country presence. Here I focus more on the country strategic plan evaluations. And what we have been learning is that it has really strengthened the engagement we have had with national evaluators or evaluators based in countries where we were undertaking the evaluations. And it has really given them a place in the evaluation teams that they did not necessarily had systematically before the crisis. That's something in WFP we are recognizing that on that level we really have made progress, and that is a real gain from this dramatic crisis that we can capitalize on for the future in terms of and ensuring a much more balanced evaluation teams, not only in terms of gender, but in terms of diversity, and relying on a hybrid approach is also good for the environment. So that's another gain we see that we definitely want to keep in the future. The carbon footprint really has been totally different over these last couple of years. So those are elements we want to capitalize on. Another point I wanted to tackle and recognize is that the hybrid model has as a challenge, it's that usually we found that instead of having a compact mission in country of 1 week at inception stage and 2-3 weeks at data collection stage like we have traditionally, we have seen those phases of interviews and interactions with stakeholders take more time. And so that is a real challenge because we don't want to expand further the evaluation process, but people find over time, overall, that it is easier to cancel a Teams meeting and then reschedule it. While when people are in country for the mission, focused only on that, then it is it keeps a much more compact dimension. The fragmentation of the conversations and of the information gathering is also highlighted by colleagues as sometimes a challenge, the challenge to bring everything together because it lasts longer. Another challenge that we just were reconnecting to, basically because one of our colleagues was able to undertake a mission very recently, and he was reminding us all of the value of being in country to understand dynamics that are not understandable by Teams or Zoom meetings. The informal conversations one can have to deepen something that was said in a meeting but not fully understood. There are all kinds of dimensions that we are losing by being remote. So those elements are elements that we we have to pay attention to balance the added value of the virtual environment versus the face-to-face. And it is a case-by-case basis, really, that we are going to handle that question. It's not like systematically we should go one way or systematically the other way. We have to find the right balance. Sorry. Another point I wanted to raise is the issue of workshops. Virtual workshops have actually enabled a much more inclusive level of participation for internal stakeholders in the organization, having people from headquarters, regional bureau, and country offices in the same workshop, and have numerous focused conversations over the course of an evaluation, both for global evaluations or country-level evaluations, or the design workshops for impact evaluations, have all been very beneficial. With some caveats, though. For example, on impact evaluation, the experience shows that if we have only virtual workshop without impact evaluation capacity on the ground, then it is extremely difficult to follow up after the workshops. So again, that for each cases we need to find a balance between the virtual and the face-to-face approach. We also have been using virtual workshops a lot for all our capacity development activities, and they proved very positive so far. So just to close, because I don't want to be longer, because I don't have a PowerPoint, we are looking at not a straightforward way forward where we will go only one way or another. What we find is that we are much more adaptive than we thought we could be, and we want to retain that in the future, not ahead of a future crisis, but as an overall approach. We have developed new evaluation data collection methods that we are going to continue to use, even if we can go on the ground. We have been working on the developmental evaluation approach for our main strategic evaluation of the COVID-19 that we want to pursue as a good practice. So there are a lot of very positive lessons learned for all evaluation types. I'm happy to reflect, but another point just to close is that we have also strongly developed lessons learned with other stakeholders on key issues. I think the engagement with other agencies on lessons learned, on undertaking synthesis, and certainly the role of the Office of Evaluation of the OECD DAC has been really instrumental in bringing us all together on certain issues. And that has also been the case within the UNEG for some other elements. So the interaction with other agencies really has increased tremendously. There are challenges in some areas, but that's always that way. Thank you, Elisabetta.
Thank you, Anne-Claire, and thank you. We had the second questions, but you covered it already very well, and it was what we should take for the future. So really, thank you for that perspective. We now have some time, about 10 minutes for questions or just for sharing your experience. And if you do that, please be short. And also please try, if you can, to think about what should remain for the future, what we learned that we should take forward. Thank you. You can raise your hand, of course, or use the chat as you prefer. And if you ask a question to Peter or Anne-Claire, just say so that they know. Maybe Sabas, you want to ask your question?
Sure, thank you. Very useful and interesting presentations. The colleagues have highlighted the importance of national consultants in this situation. But at least in our case, being a small agency working from headquarters, we have struggled a lot to find national consultants at the field level. What can we do in that sense? Are there plans, for example, to share evaluation consultant rosters from other agencies, from the agencies that work in the field, or anything else to help with this? Thank you.
Yeah, Xin, maybe you want to say something. Otherwise, I think this is already a question for Anne-Claire and Peter, if they have experiences.
Well, actually, my question is also related to national consultant. I'm so glad to see some very successful examples from the presentation. So based on my experience, I feel I have a mixed feeling. I mean, on one hand, I think it's a good opportunity for us to give the to develop the capacity of national consultant. But at the same time, I see they do play a bigger role in data collection. But when it comes to validation workshops, still the international consultant, who are always the team leader, will present. So the chance for the national consultant to voice their viewpoint is still limited. So sometimes I think whether this is the lost opportunity. Then I'm thinking about how we can do better to make the capacity building happen. Maybe in the future in TOR we can raise this issue, ask the building team to present their plan to build the national evaluators capacity as a part of the application. Over.
Thank you, Xin. And I think that also like just sharing information among agencies at local level would be very beneficial for the ones that don't have a presence in country. I don't see other questions. So Peter, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of observations on the national consultant, and indeed it is a mixed experience. And on concretely on the roster, I mean, we don't yet have a roster for international consultants, and there have been numbers of attempts in the history of the UNEG to address that, and for whatever reason, it's never materialized. So I think some of those would also apply to national consultants. I think using national consultants is very important for certain things, and as part of the stages, and that was also mentioned. We also need to be very aware of the national consultant's position in a given country. If you have national consultants, they are often fairly limited. Those who might be able to work in the ways that we are expected to work, and that our commissioners are expecting, and so on, in terms of the evaluations, or most of our evaluations. And that limited group of people, I mean, first of all, with the issues of capacity, but also they get labeled as the UN's evaluators, and the UN evaluation, the UN system evaluators, and that can be challenging at times for them to deal with that role. It also becomes an issue of them to make sure that they maintain their name on that roster, and that their approach to evaluation needs to be, accordingly, and so on. This is not a necessarily a unique feature with working with national consultants, of ensuring that the conditions for impartiality is there. But when you are national consultants and you're, depending on the work with the UN system, and you are doing evaluations that often come in and have to say certain things about national capacity, national commitment, et cetera, you could be in a difficult situation. So we need to think, very carefully about that. And we also, of course, need to say that national consultants are no different than international consultants in terms of issues like exposure to risk and harm's way and so on, and that it should not be seen as a way for us to do certain work that we would not otherwise do. We need to make sure the same standards are applied. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Good observations. There is a question from Lauretta. Joseph, if you want to ask it directly. Otherwise, she asks the panel how the timeliness of your evaluations and the subsequent, sorry, I'm reading weirdly, reports has or not been impacted. What about the timeless, basically? Did you lose or not?
Okay, maybe I can pick that one, and then I'll come back to the issue of national consultants. On our side, we have been struggling with timeliness for some of our evaluations, but I am not sure that the issue has been more dramatic than in some cases when we have an evaluation process that doesn't go as it should have been. except for the dimension I was referring to earlier. It's that the expansion of the time it takes to undertake the data collection, because as the team is not entirely in the country, and some of those conversations are undertaken remotely. Sometimes it has an impact on the duration of the data collection, and then we have to try to recover during the analysis and reporting phase, which is sometimes a real struggle. So that's the main issue that I have observed. But overall, we have been able to keep our overall timelines. To come back on the question of the national consultants, I want to come back on a point very important that Peter has made, and it is that the principle of do no harm, or the safety of the national consultant, is as important as the one of the international ones, obviously. So that's something we have been extremely vigilant about and we still are, obviously, in WFP. But our experience overall is rather positive on the balance. Yes, there are some cases where it has not been as we had anticipated or hoped for. It brings me to the point that Xing has made on the capacity development. There has been a couple of instances where we had found national consultants who were not necessarily evaluators initially, and we have engaged with the evaluation team to actually, let's say, coach very closely and work very closely with the national experts in the team to ensure that they had the basic appropriate skills to engage in an evaluative conversation. So that was really one of the parameters we have been working most in a couple of cases where we were not able to find national evaluators. In terms of the limitation of the role of national evaluators to data collection, yes, indeed, at times it happens, but not always. We have national evaluators who are team leaders of our evaluations, and or have a senior role in the evaluation teams, and therefore they are absolutely, I'm sure, I don't have to check back to be sure that they have been engaged, but I cannot confirm that for 100% of the evaluations. I do recognize that in some cases, indeed, their role may be more limited at the data collection stage. But overall, the trend I see is that situation is improving. Compared to before the COVID-19, where they were surely mostly involved in data collection and not so much later, that the space they are now occupying in the analysis and report writing is much, much more important. So I think we are on the right track on that front. Over from me. Thank you.
Thank you. We see we have a last time for a last question or intervention from Solomon. Lucia Musi. Please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Solomon Luchams from Uganda. I just want to thank you for convening this important meeting in the light of COVID. I think it has come in the right time because it's handy. It has come in the right time given the challenges that we are experiencing in collecting accurate data in as well as observing social distancing. Standard operating procedures. I'd like to ask a question in regards to national consultancies. When you talk about national consultancies, that could be able to help out on giving out this information. But I would like to know who qualifies to be a national consultant. Is there a roller coaster? I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. I'm repeating things that have been already said, but I just want to know what is the criteria of becoming national consultant. And is there a roller coaster already for national consultancies? For example, for my country, Uganda, how do I get to know these national consultancies, and in case I need some assistances or in the project currently I'm implementing an agricultural project, in the projects that I'm implementing or I'm monitoring, well, how do I get to know them? How do I get to link up with them such that we can be able to share these ideas? But who qualifies? Is there a criteria for someone to qualify to be a national consultant? Over to you.
Maybe I can clarify, and I think Carlos is making a good comment on the chat here. In WFP, all our evaluations are undertaken by external consultants, international, and they are all from different countries. Let's put it that way. When we do a country an evaluation, in South Sudan, for example, we always in our TORs would explain that we would like to have the following list of competencies, of skills, and we want a team which is including, for sure, a certain number of national consultants within the team. But we do not predefine which skills they have to have. We just identify the list of skills we want the team all together to have. And so from one evaluation to another, the national consultants will have different skills. What matters is that all together they have the skills to address the evaluation questions. And it is the company who is making a bid for the evaluation who is looking for those consultants. I would also say that there exist a lot of regional evaluation associations, and that we do reach out to these type of regional associations to identify consultants who have expertise in evaluation in particular. So that I know is a good place where we regularly try to tap in. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I think we need a session on this specific topic probably. But what you said before, that thanks to one of the positive changes that happened was the increased use of local capacity. So this is very positive. And now let Xin Yang start the second part of the session. I should have thanked Anne-Claire and Peter once more first on stakeholder engagement. Thank you. You're on mute.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. I also want to draw your attention to the chat box, because IFAD and FAO colleagues also shared the link to their independent evaluation office, so you can learn about their practice during the COVID. So part 2 of this session focuses on stakeholder engagement during the pandemic. The pandemic has presented tremendous challenges for stakeholder engagement when we conduct evaluations. How could evaluations operate in a context where travel and meeting in person have become almost impossible? Although the demand for timely, relevant learning about effort to respond to COVID is always there, it has been increasingly difficult for UN agencies to conduct the traditional and formal evaluations. Both speakers in part 1 has highlighted these challenges. At the same time, COVID also poses funding, staffing, and capacity challenges for stakeholders that threaten to undermine their activities and contribution for the evaluations. So against this background, we have to ask ourselves a series of questions, some of which have been mentioned in Peter's presentation. For example, is this the right time to conduct evaluation? Is it possible for us to approach the stakeholders and beneficiaries in an efficient and safe way? And if an evaluation or evaluative assessment is essential to our work, how should we design and implement that? So today we have 3 UN agencies, FAO, UNRWA, and the Office of Internal Oversight Services, to share their experience in engaging stakeholders during COVID-19. As you can see, each of these agencies has its unique mandate, which means their stakeholders are also very different. So we're eager to learn how they use different firms' communication and products to engage their stakeholder groups when conducting evaluation during the pandemic. First, Carlos Tarazona from FAO will share some insight on how to ensure evaluation uptake, inclusiveness, and outreach in times of a crisis. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Xinxin, and good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Let me just upload this presentation. Yes, can you see it? Yes, thank you, Xinxin. So let me start with some definition of stakeholder engagement. So stakeholder involvement or engagement refers to the participation of stakeholders in one or more components of the evaluation process. This involvement implies a role beyond providing information or responding to data gathering instruments. Stakeholders who are involved in the evaluation process contribute to important decisions regarding evaluation planning, implementation, and use. So let us hold on this aspect of contribute to important decisions. As some of us know, the UN Evaluation Group have developed some years ago the principle for stakeholder engagement. So these principles contain a very good lines of thought or ideas of what we need to do to ensure that contribution from those stakeholders. So the principle one is that we need to follow is to identify those stakeholders and the role they will play in the evaluation. The second principle is that we need to promote an inclusive and diverse stakeholder engagement with a tailored approach by a stakeholder. And then for engaging stakeholders properly, we need to do that early on and throughout the process. Principle 4 also speaks about seizing opportunities to engage with stakeholders to promote an evaluation culture, as well as to maintain clear and tailored communication in Principle 5, and while doing so in Principle 6, to do it with high ethical standards, respecting different sensitivities and also acknowledging the diversity of the workforce that exists in the UN. So given that we have these principles, we are actually gatekeepers, the evaluators of stakeholder engagement. So some contextual considerations when we are doing our job, engaging with stakeholders. So what is the state of engagement, therefore, we need to have? So to inform, consult, collaborate, or even empower some of the stakeholders. What we need to do to ensure a stakeholder buy-in, from member states, management, staff, partners, resource partners, implementing partners, development partners, communities, etc. So what do we need to envisage a multiple forms of engagement, and this can be included in an evaluation. But while we're doing so, we also need to be aware of the resource implications, especially time, not just from the evaluators, but also from the colleagues, from the members, from management, and other stakeholders, communities as well. An important aspect as well in actually achieving this stakeholder engagement is whether we have the skills to properly engage with these stakeholders, especially facilitation skills. And while doing our work, being mindful of the ethical considerations, we also need to be mindful of the power dynamics that may happen in this process of engagement. Sometimes evaluation risk can be seen as being very powerful, and therefore can have sometimes unintended consequence in trying to engage with many colleagues or many people. There could be in some cases, I'm sure some of you may have heard about this term, evaluation fatigue, in some corners. Likewise, there are context-specific variations, because we are working with people at the end of the day, and the people have different cultural backgrounds, and sometimes we have to ask ourselves, do we have the right competencies to engage with the different cultural backgrounds? And to make matters more complicated, how we do all this, in remote evaluations, like as before our colleagues from other agencies have been explaining. I mean, we have all been doing either remote or hybrid evaluation. So how do we keep this stakeholder engagement? How do we ensure that our stakeholders contribute to the evaluation use, evaluation implementation, evaluation planning, in a meaningful way, while doing this all remotely, from our bedrooms or from our living rooms? So let me give you a brief overview of what we try to do in this evaluation that I just shared on the chat box. This ongoing evaluation of FAO's COVID-19 response and recovery program. So one of the aspects that we wanted to ensure, because being a real-time evaluation, meaning that doing it when the program is being implemented, is that we needed to ensure the buy-in from management, senior colleagues that, as you can imagine, as in many of the agencies, were really very, very busy trying to respond to this pandemic, in different ways, while keeping the organization still also operational. So it was difficult, but it was possible for them to give us their views, to give us their ideas on what they will find useful, for us to do as we go along and support the oversight function of many of these offices, including regional offices like UNICEF did, but also the needs of our member states, and also needs of management in doing this effective response. However, they are not the only users, So we also have very important users who are the staff members that are working in the implementation of this response. We also have development partners who are also being assisting, collaborating, and also funding some of them part of the response. So each of them require different fora, and each of them require also different type of communication materials so that they can absorb it and use it in their work. This morning we made a presentation to our board and to our governing bodies on this evaluation, and I think I found that one of the things we did when planning this process of evaluation was also to hear them early on what the member states were interested in knowing. And sometimes you don't need to ask; you just need to read what their statements are. You need to analyze as well their positions, their interests, so that when you prepare a product for them, you ensure that you are meeting their expectations. At the same time, as I'm following the principles that I was highlighting before, this need for a multicultural background actually, I think, is something very important. We have evaluators with different backgrounds, coming from different regions, also with expertise in different areas. So these complementary skill sets, which sometimes can be a bit difficult to manage, at the end of the day, bear the fruits of providing a product that will be able to serve the needs of different constituencies. So I think this is an area that I'm glad that it came up also in the previous discussion. Having these different cultural backgrounds in some of these evaluations, having people with different experience is very important. Another aspect that was also is still very important is the role that we can have as facilitators of change. Many times in the last few months, when we have been doing this evaluation, there had already been evaluative process, assessments that come through regional level, organized by different actors, not necessarily my organization. So sometimes we just have to play this facilitation role, and not necessarily needed to be an evaluator, as such, because sometimes the learning was already happening, but the evaluators were calling to support that process. So that involved, for example, supporting different units, different programs in doing their theory of change. Sometimes also involve, and this was also something we designed with evaluation. We designed core learning groups for different teams in order to reach certain people in certain teams, no? So in order to facilitate the uptake of the knowledge, no? So we had to compartmentalize it somehow, no? In some areas. And in one opportunity, as I think some colleagues mentioned also, we are also engaging with other external actors. I mean, the COVID-19 Evaluation Coalition is a good example of how through that we can actually reach out member states. We can also reach out partners, no? And therefore make sure that different set of stakeholders can be served to different means, different fora, while doing the evaluation and in this new normal. No? So thank you. Let me leave it here.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Very glad to hear that stakeholder engagement during the pandemic can still serve multiple purposes, including informing, involving, and empowering. So our next speaker is Leslie Thomas. She will share UNRWA's experience in stakeholder engagement in complex emergency settings. Leslie, please go ahead.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. So just for context, hopefully everybody can see the screen. UNRWA is, you know, a more unique agency in that we're in direct service delivery, and we serve over 5 million registered refugees in the Middle East in 5 fields of operation, including Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, and Gaza. And we educate children, we have health clinics, we provide protection services, food and cash relief, for the most poor in those emergency settings, and we also maintain refugee camps and provide infrastructure. So during COVID, we've had several commissioned evaluations, and we've also managed some ourselves. And the commissioned evaluations have always involved remote data collection. So I was just going to talk a little bit about our experience on some of these tools, what worked well, what did not work well. And predominantly over the time, we just used the standards, you know, focus group discussions, phone interviews, online surveys, and we also used WhatsApp messaging surveys. And just from a going forward perspective, I mean, I think we're going to really look to boosting in-person methods. We have had enumerators, we have had core member teams located in our fields of operation, but through COVID and through some of the crises and the fields that we were gathering feedback, Lebanon, for example, given the settings there and even, you know, just security risk of people moving, we were pretty much relying a lot on virtual methods. So related to beneficiary surveys, so it's you know, we've had experience in doing surveys with staff, but doing them with beneficiaries where we've sent a link to them is not something that's been commonly used by the agency. And we used some recently. Requests for the surveys were sent through SMS. And because of a concern that beneficiaries may forward these on, we asked for their registration number in the survey. Some of the issues that came up, the survey was translated professionally by the evaluation team. However, and it was reviewed, but I don't think there was enough time given to allow for sufficient review of the survey, and some of the terminology used wasn't commonly understood. So one of the main lessons was making sure that staff at lower levels of the organization are proofreading and looking and testing the survey. Also, clearly important to keep these things really tight, focusing on key questions, because especially for us, I don't think beneficiaries have a lot of experience in doing surveys, and any kind of advanced question types are problematic. Clearly, using an online survey has limitations and response bias concerns for people who can't read, and also people who wouldn't have smartphones. So, you know, it's not an ideal tool and should be used in select ways. Let me see, I'm sorry. The other tool that we used, which was actually fairly interesting, was the use of WhatsApp voice messages. These were sent out and allowed and asking people to record answers to about 3 to 4 qualitative questions. We used them and it was used in a very tight way. We only distributed to about 100 people it wasn't a big population. And we used male and female voices to record the messages that were going, so that it was gender sensitive in its distribution. I mean, it allows for more accessibility. WhatsApp is broadly used by the agency's programs, so we already had communication trees and the ability to be able to reach people. So we already had the phone numbers in that capacity in place. We want to look at it more and use it a little bit more in the year ahead. And there's actually UNDP Lebanon has used it for really broadening their reach and some monitoring and evaluative processes. And there was an interesting guide I found online related to it. Phone interviews, we've, clearly, I mean, this is a common tool. We were using SMS requests to gather participants and to get consent. We provide information, contact data for enumerators so they know who to call if protection issues come up or there are any complaints of fraud or misconduct by staff that come up during this session, during the call. We also have made follow-up calls for those cases that involve sensitive individuals or vulnerabilities or potential protection cases. When those things come up, we followed up. We had social workers following up with those individuals. What we've learned, though, is that the people who we think will answer the phone may not always answer the phone. It's important to make sure that there's really strong clarity about the scheduling and the process and who's going to be calling them and when they're going to be called. We did have some female callers drop off because they either lacked privacy or they weren't comfortable that their husbands would allow them to do the call. So there are also, there are just limitations with it as well. And there are some abandonment rates. Focus group discussions, we've used virtual platforms with staff and then hybrid approaches with beneficiaries where we bring them into a location, have them distanced and have individual laptops with them. We've paid for travel costs to come to the setting. I mean, these things just take a lot of administrative time. There have been some levels of no-shows, especially in Lebanon, given how the crisis has, just really unfolded there over the last year. It's really made getting people to come challenging. We ended up, there was trouble in getting, with all the administrative work that was happening on that, we ended up actually having to add days and time to an evaluation that we didn't anticipate having to do that for, and we utilized some of our M&E staff to implement on those, in which for a commissioned evaluation isn't standard, and commissioning teams normally might have concerns about that, but it is an approach that we used in order to provide some more data gathering. That's all I have, and appreciate the opportunity. But again, I think just from a recap perspective, we want to try to keep using these methods and exploring the use of the methods, but we still have more to learn and how to make sure that they're well managed and giving us the bang that we need from the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We heard a lot of good practice and the lessons learned related to innovative data collection methods. Very impressive indeed. So we all understand that the pandemic has brought a big challenge to evaluation management, particularly to quality assurance when we're adopting new tools and methods. Thank you for sharing your experience. So our final speakers are Seva Messil and Michael scroll from the Office of Internal Oversight Services. They will use four recent evaluations as case studies to explore how to engage stakeholders in the peacekeeping context. Michael and Seba, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shinshin. Hello, colleagues. Greetings from Entebbe, Uganda. For the next 10 minutes or so, Michael and I will be speaking on the stakeholder engagement in peace operation that includes peacekeeping and special political missions on behalf of the Office of Internal Oversight Services, Inspection and Evaluation Division. We'll be speaking to you about the opportunities that we had, the challenges we faced, and the lessons for the future. I'm moving the slide. I don't know whether. Yeah, okay. So to speak about the stakeholders that we have for the evaluation of peacekeeping and special political missions, we primarily engage with 6 sets of stakeholders. That includes the departments of peacekeeping, peace operations, and the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, and the relevant peacekeeping and special political missions, the United Nations country team, and the government officials and their institutions, and also the local communities, and lastly, some of the relevant international partners. Considering the pandemic situation and its impact, as well as IED's new focus on outcome evaluations, we carried out advanced planning and coordination with relevant stakeholders regarding the evaluation topic and methodology. That was very helpful. And today we'll be sharing with you our experience from 2 of our peacekeeping evaluation. That was MINUSMA in Mali and MONUSCO in the DRC. Hello. Sorry, there was a problem. So we'll be speaking to you about the 2 of the peacekeeping evaluations where we were able to actually conduct field travel and a thematic evaluation on women, peace and security in political transitions and elections. This covered 3 peacekeeping missions and 3 special political missions. And lastly, on the support provided to UNRWA led real-time evaluation. Now, speaking about the opportunities to engage with the stakeholders. So we were able to carry out advanced liaison and coordination to ensure support from MINUSMA and MONUSCO, as well as the government officials in Mali and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And their willingness and also the support for the evaluation was very good and helpful for conduct of the evaluation. We also made optimal use of Microsoft Teams, Zoom, and also WhatsApp for the online survey, and also to reach out to and engage with different stakeholders. We followed a hybrid approach, particularly for those 2 peacekeeping evaluations in MINUSMA and MONUSCO, in which we were able to combine remote and in-person interviews and focus group discussions. Then we also conducted the field visits to Mali and DRC and its provinces for direct engagements and observation, where we could see the impact or the outcome of the work that they have done wherever it was possible. And we also expanded the use of secondary data, survey instrument, and also data partnership, including with ACLED, Malimeter, etc., for even the GIS data. Hiring of subject matter experts for the Women, Peace and Security evaluation, and also national consultants for MINUSMA and MONUSCO evaluations were very helpful to cover the scope and also to outreach with stakeholders and various locations where we could not actually reach physically. Remote access to key informants was also helpful, where the security situation and logistic constraints actually did not permit us to have direct engagements. For example, the engagements with the interlocutors in Afghanistan and also with some of the remote locations in Mali and DRC was also helpful. With that, now I hand over to Michael to speak on the challenges and lessons. Michael, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shiva. If you can switch to the next slide, please.
Sorry, just one
Sometimes
second.
it just may take a bit of time with synchronization. But just as an introduction, the challenges that I'll be presenting are sometimes the flip side of the opportunities. And here we are, thank you. So there's obviously a difficulty in scheduling interviews and limited access to government and community key informants if done remotely. And I think one participant mentioned that it's obviously easier to postpone an MS Teams call than to cancel a meeting if you stand in front of the door, in front of the office. Connectivity issues in remote locations, not surprising, but that is definitely a constraining factor. Different time zones and languages as well, especially when it comes to evaluations that cover many different time zones. That is difficult to manage sometimes and could be very stressful for both, the stakeholders as well as for the evaluation team. Access to implementation sites for direct observation is obviously limited. So there's always a question about, do we really, are we able to cover, some of the key points if we're not able to go and see for ourselves? Potential reputational risk when engaging with stakeholders during a pandemic. You could be perceived as a person who is bringing potentially COVID to a location or to a specific office. Impact of travel restrictions and COVID protocols, they, as you all know, they tend to change, sometimes by the day, sometimes by the week. And, if you meet people in person using masks or being outside, and so you have to consider all of this during the planning. Concerns about confidentiality during remote engagements where people may be less open to speak. Maybe they think that other people can get into crash the Zoom call or the MS Teams call, or if they think that calls are recorded, for example, even if they're not. Okay, Shiva, next slide, please. So lessons for future practice. One thing we learned, especially with the two where we actually traveled to Congo and to Mali, is that robust design for remote and field data collection is possible. Traveling is also possible. I know that different organizations have different standard operating procedures, and sometimes it's also a question of the personal risk that an evaluator wants to take on. But we thought that traveling is possible, and it also has many advantages of when it comes to face-to-face meetings. We got feedback from stakeholders that they actually appreciated that we made that effort to come and travel despite restrictions and despite the risk involved, and that was a sign for our stakeholders that we are sincere about the evaluation and the evaluation process. Pandemic situation demands scope adjustments, agile design, methodology, and also extending the timeline sometimes. Field visits and direct observations are crucial to complement remote engagements, so good complementarity is helpful. Increased work with national consultant and subject matter experts were useful. Was mentioned earlier, the question about the market, the availability was definitely there. We had issues finding good consultants because we were not the only organizations that wanted to use national consultants, more or more extensively. And I think what's important is need to manage the risk of selection bias if remote data collection only. Obviously, all of you are aware of biases and methodological challenges, and I think it's really critical when it comes to remote data collection to be open and transparent about possible selection bias. That's all from us. Thank you. Over to you, Chin.
Thank you so much, Shiva and Michael. You have shown us some vivid examples of how we have to be flexible to grasp opportunities for evaluation and learning in the middle of chaos caused by the pandemic. I want to thank all the presenters again for your sharing. Now the floor is open for comments and questions from the audience. Okay. So we only have 8 minutes to do this. Okay, go ahead, Mona. I see your hand is up.
I'm going to take organizer privilege and take the first question. OIOS brought up an interesting point about the inability to do direct observation during remote evaluations. And I was just wondering whether any of the participants had had experiences during this period of using photo or video evidence or satellite evidence or other sort of workarounds like that, which of course don't necessarily replace direct observation, but at least can mitigate that challenge. So I was just curious if there were experiences amongst the group in that regard.
Yeah, may I answer, or you want to take a few more questions and then we do?
I do not see other questions. Please go ahead then.
Okay, thank you, Mona. In fact, for the evaluation of MONUSCO, we couldn't go to all the places where we wanted to go because there were UN flights were not there, or due to security incidents we couldn't go. But then both government officials as well as the MONUSCO staff and UN country team who are deployed in various locations did share with us photographs of the work done or some of the videos that has been done. And we also got some GIS maps to showcase the change in the pattern of armed group activities in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo for last 3-4 years through ECLED as well as the UN headquarters. So these are the additional information that actually helped us to garner more inputs. And government also, where possible, were able to give their official data with regard to their own budgetary related issues, because we were looking at capacity and capability enhancement support provided by MONUSCO. So they were also able to give additional information in that regard. Michael, would you like to add anything on MINUSMA?
Yeah, we did use more extensively subnational survey data. Obviously, it's not really a good substitute for direct observation. And we had a consultant visiting a couple of places where he did make some photos, but it wasn't systematic. It wasn't a systematic kind of photo monitoring or using video photo.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So before other questions come up, if I'm allowed, Carlos, I want to go back to you to ask you the question, what are the lessons we can take forward from the pandemic for us to be better prepared for the future crisis? I think other presenters have touched upon this issue during their presentation. Now I want to seek your insight on this. Carlos. Is Carlos still there?
I'm here. It's just that okay. the computer is getting tired after 6 hours of Zoom and all that. Well, I think one of the main lessons learned is that we are able to work, from distance, no? And this is something that I was maybe one of those who was a little bit more concerned, because I was still saying, and still, hard for me, I still see the value of evaluation as us going to the field, and us doing the judgment calls, Whereas now with this distance or these hybrid modalities, somehow we have relinquished part of that, So, but as a lesson, I think if one properly design the evaluation, and if one properly identifies the purpose of the exercise, and if that can be satisfied with the tools we have at hand, then I think one of the lessons is that we can do properly credible remote evaluations, but only if the purpose and the means are suitable to the needs. So let me leave that one there.
Okay, thank you very much. I see that it shows there's only 5 minutes left in this meeting. So if there's no more questions or comments, I would like to give the floor back to Elisabetta.
Thank you, Xin. Thank you. I think it's just it's good we even have 5 minutes earlier. I see that some people are leaving already to other commitments, most likely. First, I would like to thank all the presenters, Anne-Claire, Peter, Carlos, Leslie, Michael, and Shiva. Really thank you for being so generous and sharing your experiences. Then a special thanks to you, Xin, to Jane, and to Mona, who collaborated and helped really to put this session together. And I would let Mona, who is the chair of the COVID-19 Working Group for UNEG, who had maybe the idea in the first place, to please close the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta, and thank you, Xin. I should clarify, actually, Masa is the chair, but I've been kind of helping out with the working group organization. Thank you very much for your role in organizing and facilitating this, and thank you for the participants and to all the presenters. I just wanted to close out by noting that this is actually the first of 2 EPE sessions that the COVID-19 working group will be organizing. The second one will be focused on actual evaluations of COVID response. And I know that some of the examples given today were of evaluations of COVID response, but it was really more focused on how we've adapted our evaluative work. The second session will be focused more on lessons from evaluating COVID, and that will take place on November 9th. More information will be forthcoming about that. Also, I know, there was quite a robust discussion about national capacity development, and there is also an EPE from that working group on the 29th of November that I'm sure will touch upon a lot of the same issues. So just with that in mind, I know we've all been sort of learning as we go throughout this process, and in addition to providing learning to the rest of our organizations, we've had to really absorb it ourselves and adapt and ensure the primacy of evaluation and the importance of evidence doesn't get lost in the midst of a global crisis like this. So I just wanted to thank you all again. We'll have the recording available as well as the presentations available, not just for attendees, but for the rest of UNEG. And we look forward to seeing you during the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.